I watched them argue over who deserved more. None of them looked at me. The mahogany dining table that had hosted 40 years of family dinners now served as a battlefield, covered with legal documents and itemized lists that reduced my mother's life to dollar amounts and distribution percentages. My siblings sat around it like vultures in designer clothing, their voices rising and falling in practiced cadences of entitlement and grievance. The china set should come to me, my sister Patricia declared, her manicured fingers drumming against the table's polished surface. I'm the one who hosted Mother for the holidays these past 5 years, only because you live closest. My brother Michael shot back, adjusting his expensive tie with the same precision he used to adjust his arguments. I'm the one who handled all her financial affairs. I think that earns me some consideration here. Financial affairs you were paid to handle, Patricia snapped. As her attorney, you billed her estate for every phone call. I sat at the far end of the table, the same seat I'd occupied during childhood dinners, always slightly removed from the main conversation, always the youngest, always the afterthought. The irony wasn't lost on me that even in death, my mother had arranged for me to be in the same position, present but peripheral, included but ignored. The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. Perhaps we could discuss the jewelry next. There are several pieces of significant value, ... The pearl necklace was promised to me. My sister-in-law Jennifer interjected, speaking for the first time since we'd gathered. Mother told me at Christmas that she wanted me to have it. Mother told everyone they could have everything, Michael said dryly. She was 93 and had dementia. Her promises don't constitute legal documentation. I watched this exchange with a familiar detachment. The same feeling I'd had during family gatherings for the past decade. The feeling of being a ghost at my own life, present but unseen, acknowledged but not truly included. They spoke around me, over me, about me, but never to me. What about the house? Patricia asked, pulling out a folder thick with real estate assessments. The market value is substantial, and the location is prime. We need to decide whether to sell or if one of us wants to buy out the others. I'd like to keep it in the family, Michael said. My kids have memories there. Your kids visited twice a year, Patricia countered. My children practically grew up in that house. Because you used Mother as free babysitting, Michael replied, his voice sharp with old resentments. The lawyer looked down at his notes, clearly uncomfortable with the family dynamics playing out before him. The will does specify that the house should be sold and the proceeds divided equally among the 3 beneficiaries, unless all parties agree to an alternative arrangement. 3 beneficiaries. I was one of them, technically, but you wouldn't know it from the conversation. They discussed the house as if I didn't exist, as if my opinion on our childhood home was irrelevant, as if my memories of the place where I'd learned to walk and talk and dream were somehow less valid than theirs. The furniture alone is worth a fortune, Jennifer said, consulting her own list. The antique armoire in the master bedroom, the grandfather clock, the Persian rugs, ... Double quotes, we should get everything appraised professionally, Patricia said. I don't trust Michael's estimates. My estimates are based on actual market research, Michael replied coldly. Unlike your sentimental valuations, I thought about the armoire they were discussing, the one where my mother used to keep her special occasion dresses, the one I'd hidden behind during games of hide-and-seek. I thought about the grandfather clock that had chimed every hour of my childhood, marking time through homework sessions and bedtime stories and Christmas mornings. I thought about the Persian rug where I'd played with dolls while my mother read nearby, the soft wool pattern worn smooth by generations of family life. But I didn't speak. I'd learned long ago that my voice carried no weight in family discussions, that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, that my role was to listen and agree and take whatever was left after the real family members had made their choices. There's also Mother's personal effects to consider, the lawyer continued, consulting another document. Photographs, books, clothing, smaller household items, ... I'll take the photo albums, Patricia said immediately. I'm the one who's been organizing family pictures for years. The books should be donated, Michael said. Most of them are outdated anyway. Some of those books are first editions, Jennifer pointed out. They could be valuable. I thought about my mother's library, the floor-to-ceiling shelves that had been my refuge during difficult teenage years. The poetry collections she'd read aloud to me, the novels we'd discussed over tea, the cookbooks filled with her handwritten notes and modifications. Books that had shaped my love of reading, that had given me a vocabulary for emotions I couldn't otherwise express. "What about the jewelry box?" Patricia asked. "The wooden one with the music box dancer." "That's not particularly valuable," Michael said dismissively. "It's not about value," Patricia replied. "It's about sentiment." I remembered that jewelry box, the way the tiny ballerina would spin to Fr. Elise while my mother got ready for church on Sunday mornings. I remembered being allowed to wind it up as a special treat, watching the dancer twirl in her pink tutu while the melody played. I remembered my mother telling me that someday, when I was older, I could have jewelry of my own to keep in a box just like it. But I didn't mention these memories. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching my siblings divide up the physical remnants of our mother's life with the efficiency of accountants and the sentiment of strangers. "We should also discuss the timing," the lawyer said. "The estate needs to be settled within 6 months, which means decisions about the house and major assets need to be made relatively quickly. I can have the house appraised by next week," Michael said, already pulling out his phone to check his calendar. "And I'll get estimates on the furniture and artwork," Patricia added. They spoke in the future tense, making plans and arrangements as if the matter was already decided, as if my consent was assumed rather than requested. I was a beneficiary in name only, a legal requirement rather than a family member with equal standing. "Is there anything else we need to cover today?" Michael asked, glancing at his watch. "I have a conference call at 4. "Just the personal items," the lawyer said. "Clothing, toiletries, things of minimal monetary value but potential sentimental worth. We can deal with that later," Patricia said with a wave of her hand. "Most of it will probably just get donated anyway." I thought about my mother's clothes, the soft cardigans she wore while reading in her favorite chair, the silk scarf she always wore to church, the apron she'd worn while teaching me to bake cookies. Items that held no monetary value but contained entire lifetimes of memory and meaning. "Well then," the lawyer said, gathering his papers, "I think we've covered the major points. I'll prepare the necessary documents for your review, and we can schedule another meeting once the appraisals are complete." My siblings began to rise from their chairs, already moving on to their next appointments, their next obligations, their next priorities. The business of dividing our mother's life had been conducted with the same efficiency they brought to their professional lives. And now it was time to return to those lives, leaving the messy, emotional work of grief for later, or never. "Sarah," Patricia said, finally acknowledging my presence as she gathered her purse and coat. "You've been awfully quiet. Are you okay with everything we discussed?" The question was perfunctory, asked more out of legal necessity than genuine concern. She didn't wait for my answer before continuing. "Good, I'll call you when we have the appraisal numbers." And then they were gone, leaving me alone in the dining room with the lawyer, who was packing up his briefcase with obvious relief. "Miss Thompson," he said gently, "you do understand that you have equal rights to contest any of these arrangements. You're not obligated to simply accept whatever your siblings decide." I looked at him. This stranger, who seemed to see me more clearly than my own family, and managed a small smile. "I understand," I said. "Thank you." But as he left and I sat alone in the empty dining room, I wondered if understanding was enough. I wondered if being legally equal was the same as being actually heard. I wondered if there was a difference between having rights and having a voice. Outside, the autumn rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like fingers drumming impatiently on glass, like the sound of time running out. The house felt different when I returned alone the next morning, my key still working in the lock that would soon belong to strangers. The silence was profound, not just the absence of sound but the absence of life, of the small movements and sighs that had made this place feel alive when my mother was in it. I stood in the foyer, breathing in the scent that was uniquely hers, lavender soap and old books, and the faint sweetness of the tea roses she kept in a vase by the window. Soon, this smell would fade, replaced by the neutral emptiness of a house prepared for sale. My siblings had already been here. I could tell by the small changes. Boxes stacked in the corner. Items moved and sorted, the systematic dismantling of a life already begun. They worked efficiently. I had to give them that. No lingering, no dwelling, no time wasted on sentiment that couldn't be converted to dollars. I walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them as if for the first time and the last time simultaneously. The living room, where my mother had taught me to knit, her patient hands guiding mine as I struggled with dropped stitches and tangled yarn. The kitchen, where she'd shown me how to make her famous apple pie, the recipe she'd learned from her own mother. The one that called for a pinch of love in addition to the standard ingredients. In the hallway, I paused before the family photos that lined the walls, decades of Christmas mornings, birthday parties, graduations, and weddings. I appeared in many of them, but always slightly apart, always at the edge of the frame, as if the photographer had included me as an afterthought. Even in our family pictures, I was peripheral. The phone rang, startling me from my reverie. I almost didn't answer it, but habit made me pick up the receiver in the kitchen. Thompson Residence, I said automatically, then realized how strange that sounded now. Sarah, it's Patricia. I'm glad you're there. Listen, I've been thinking about yesterday's meeting, and I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with how we're handling everything. The concern in her voice sounded genuine. But I'd learned to be wary of Patricia's sudden attacks of consideration. They usually preceded requests for compliance. I'm fine, I said, which was true in the most technical sense. Good, because Michael and I were talking, and we think it might be easier for everyone if we just handled the logistics. You know how complicated estate sales can be, and with your work schedule, double quotes, my work schedule. As if being a librarian was somehow more demanding than Michael's law practice or Patricia's real estate business. As if my time was less valuable, my opinion less informed, my grief less legitimate. We don't want to burden you with all the details, Patricia continued. We know how hard this must be for you. The irony was breathtaking. They were protecting me from the burden of participating in decisions about my own inheritance, shielding me from the difficulty of having a voice in my own family. That's thoughtful of you, I said, because it was easier than arguing, easier than explaining that being excluded was more painful than being burdened. Wonderful. Oh, and Sarah, if there are any small personal items you'd like to keep, you know? Things with sentimental value but no real worth, just let me know. I'm sure we can work something out. Small personal items. Things with sentimental value, but no real worth. The casual dismissal of everything that mattered to me, everything that couldn't be appraised or auctioned or converted to cash. After I hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the ceramic cookie jar, shaped like a fat hen that had sat on the counter for as long as I could remember. It was the kind of thing Patricia would consider worthless, the kind of thing that would end up in a donation box without a second thought. But I remembered being small enough that I had to stand on a chair to reach it. Remembered the anticipation of lifting the hen's head to see what treasures my mother had hidden inside. I opened it now and found it empty, except for a folded piece of paper. My mother's handwriting, shaky but still recognizable. For Sarah, the one who always listened. My hands trembled as I unfolded the note completely. It was a list, written in my mother's careful script, of items throughout the house, with brief explanations beside each one. The blue teacup with the chip, we used it for our Sunday afternoon talks. The cookbook, with the loose pages all our favorite recipes are marked. The quilt in the cedar chest, I made it thinking of your future home. The music box on my dresser, you always loved the dancing lady. The photo album with the red cover, all your school pictures and achievements, item after item. Each one accompanied by a memory, a reason, a connection between my mother and me that my siblings had never seen, never valued, never understood. She had been watching, had been remembering, had been seeing me even when no one else did. At the bottom of the list, in slightly larger handwriting, she had written, These things have no monetary value, but they hold all my love for you. Take them before the others decide their worth." I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the same chair where I'd sat for countless meals and conversations, and let myself cry for the first time since my mother's death. Not the polite, controlled tears I'd shed at the funeral, but the raw, honest grief of someone who had lost not just a parent, but the only person who had truly seen her. The afternoon light was fading when I finally began to collect the items from my mother's list. I moved through the house like a careful thief, gathering the pieces of my inheritance that couldn't be appraised or divided or argued over. The blue teacup went into a box along with the cookbook, its pages soft with age and stained with decades of use. The quilt was heavier than I remembered, but I managed to fold it carefully and add it to my growing collection. In my mother's bedroom, I found the music box on her dresser, just as the list had promised. I wound it up and watched the tiny ballerina spin, the familiar melody filling the empty room with bittersweet beauty. This was mine now, not because I had fought for it or because it had been legally assigned to me, but because my mother had seen me loving it, had remembered my joy in its simple magic. The photo album with the red cover was in the bottom drawer of her nightstand, and as I flipped through its pages, I saw myself through my mother's eyes. Every school play, every science fair, every small achievement that my siblings had forgotten or dismissed, she had documented it all, had seen it all as worthy of preservation and pride. There were pictures I'd never seen before, candid shots of me reading in the garden, helping her with household tasks, sitting beside her during family gatherings with a look of contentment on my face. In these photos, I wasn't peripheral or forgotten. I was central, beloved, seen. As I packed these treasures into boxes, I realized that my mother had given me something far more valuable than any inheritance my siblings could divide among themselves. She had given me proof that I mattered, evidence that I had been loved and noticed and remembered. She had given me the knowledge that at least one person in this family had seen me clearly and found me worthy of attention. The house was dark by the time I finished loading my car with the boxes of memories. I stood in the doorway one last time, looking back at the empty rooms that would soon be filled with strangers' furniture, strangers' laughter, strangers' lives. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was taking with me the parts of this house that truly mattered, not the valuable antiques or the investment-worthy artwork, but the love that had been quietly, consistently offered to me by a woman who understood what it meant to be overlooked. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Hope you found some nice keepsakes today. The appraiser comes tomorrow at 10. I typed back. "I found everything I needed. Thank you." And for the first time since my mother's death, I meant it. I had found everything I needed, everything that was truly mine. Everything that no amount of legal documentation or family politics could take away from me. As I drove home through the quiet streets, my car filled with boxes of love disguised as worthless trinkets, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years of family gatherings. I felt seen. I felt valued. I felt like I belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was just in the memory of a woman who had loved me enough to notice what no one else did. The inheritance my siblings were fighting over would be divided 3 ways, parsed and calculated and distributed according to law. But the inheritance my mother had really left me, the knowledge that I had been loved, truly and completely loved, that was mine alone, indivisible and invaluable. 3 days later, I received a call that changed everything. "Sarah, we have a problem." Patricia's voice was tight, with barely controlled frustration. "The appraiser found something in the attic that wasn't listed in any of our inventories." I was at work, shelving returned books in the quiet sanctuary of the library, when my phone buzzed. The familiar weight of being summoned to deal with family business settled on my shoulders like an old coat. "What kind of something?" I asked, keeping my voice low, out of respect for the patrons studying nearby. "Documents, a lot of documents. And some kind of collection that might be valuable. We need you to come look at it." The urgency in her voice was new. For the first time since our mother's death, Patricia needed something from me that couldn't be dismissed or delegated or handled without my input. "I can come after work," I said. "Could you come now?" "Michael's already on his way, and the appraiser is waiting." I looked around the library, at the peaceful rows of books and the quiet readers absorbed in their own worlds. This was my sanctuary, the place where I felt competent and useful, where my knowledge mattered and my opinions were respected. Leaving it to deal with family drama felt like stepping out of sunlight into shadow. But curiosity won. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The house felt different when I arrived, charged with a tension that hadn't been there during my solitary visit. Michael's BMW was in the driveway next to a van marked Heritage Appraisals, and I could hear voices coming from upstairs as I let myself in. "Sarah, thank God you're here," Patricia called from the second floor. "We're in the attic." I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a space I hadn't visited since childhood games of hide-and-seek. The low ceiling and slanted walls were exactly as I remembered, but the contents had been transformed. What had once been a chaotic storage space was now organized into careful piles. With a professional appraiser photographing and cataloging items with methodical precision. Miss Thompson. The appraiser, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and practical clothes, looked up from a box she was examining. "I'm Janet Walsh. I specialize in estate appraisals, particularly documents and collectibles." "What did you find?" I asked, looking around at the organized chaos. "Several things, actually." Janet gestured to a table that had been set up near the window. "Your mother appears to have been quite the collector, and also quite the record keeper." On the table were items I'd never seen before: leather-bound journals, photograph albums, and what appeared to be a collection of vintage postcards arranged in careful rows. But it was the stack of legal documents that had clearly captured my sibling's attention. "Show her the letters," Michael said, his lawyer's instincts clearly engaged. Janet picked up a manila folder thick with correspondence. These appeared to be letters from various museums and historical societies dating back about 15 years. They're all inquiring about a collection your mother apparently owned. "What kind of collection?" I asked. "Civil War correspondence, primarily. Letters written by soldiers to their families, some official documents, a few photographs." Janet opened another box, revealing carefully preserved papers in protective sleeves. "From what I can tell, your mother inherited these from her grandfather, who was apparently quite the history buff." I stared at the documents, trying to process this information. My mother had never mentioned owning anything historically significant, had never spoken of having items that museums might want. "There's more," Patricia said, her voice strained. "Show her the appraisal estimates." Janet handed me a preliminary report, and the numbers made my breath catch. Conservative estimates ranged from $50,000 to potentially over $100,000, depending on authentication and provenance. "This changes everything," Michael said, pacing in the limited space. "This collection isn't mentioned in the will at all. We need to determine when Mother acquired it, whether it was part of the estate she inherited from grandfather, and how it should be distributed." "Actually," Janet said carefully, "there's something else you should know. I found this letter with the correspondence from the museums." She handed me an envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. "For Sarah when the time comes." My hands shook as I opened it, aware of my siblings watching my every movement. Inside was a letter dated just 6 months before my mother's death. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then Janet has found the collection I've been hiding in the attic all these years. I know this will come as a surprise to Patricia and Michael, but it shouldn't surprise you. You're the only one who ever listened to my stories about your great-grandfather's war service. The only one who cared about family history and the importance of preserving the past. These letters and documents have been in our family for over a century. Great-grandfather collected them not for their monetary value, but because he understood that history lives in the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I've kept them safe all these years, waiting for the right person to entrust them to. The museums have been asking to purchase or display these items for years, but I always refused. Not because I didn't want to share them, but because I wanted to make sure they went to someone who would understand their true value, not their price tag, but their significance. I'm leaving this collection to you, Sarah, not as part of the official estate, but as a separate gift from me to you. The legal documents are in the blue folder. I had a lawyer draw them up years ago, completely separate from my will. This collection is yours, to keep or donate or sell as you see fit. I know your brother and sister will be upset about this. They'll see it as unfair, as favoritism, as me playing games with the inheritance. But this isn't about fairness or money. This is about understanding. You're the one who gets it, who sees the value in things that can't be appraised or auctioned. Do with these treasures what you think is right. I trust your judgment completely. All my love, Mother. The silence in the attic was deafening. I could feel my siblings' shock and anger radiating from them like heat, but I couldn't look up from my mother's words. She had seen me, had understood me, had trusted me with something precious in a way she'd never trusted them. This is ridiculous, Michael said finally, his voice sharp with legal outrage. She can't just give away $100,000 worth of assets without including them in the will. There are laws about this kind of thing. Actually, Janet said quietly, if the documents are in order, and if your mother legally separated this collection from her estate before her death, then it's perfectly legitimate. Patricia snatched the blue folder and began rifling through the legal papers inside. Her face grew paler as she read, and I could see the moment she realized that everything was indeed in order, that our mother had planned this carefully and executed it flawlessly. This isn't fair, Patricia said, her voice rising. We're supposed to split everything equally. That was the agreement. The agreement was to split the estate equally, I said, finding my voice for the first time. This isn't part of the estate. Don't be naive, Sarah, Michael snapped. This is clearly an attempt to circumvent the will. We can contest this. On what grounds? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Mother was of sound mind when she made these arrangements. She had legal counsel. She followed proper procedures. She had dementia, Patricia said desperately. She was diagnosed with dementia 6 months ago, I replied. These documents are dated over a year ago, and even then, her dementia was mild. She was perfectly capable of making legal decisions. Janet cleared her throat diplomatically. Perhaps I should give you some privacy to discuss this as a family. No, I said quickly. I think we're done here. I began gathering the collection, placing the precious documents back in their protective containers. My siblings watched in stunned silence as I claimed what was rightfully mine, what my mother had specifically chosen to give me. Sarah, Patricia said, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she'd used when we were children, and she wanted something from me. You can't seriously be planning to keep all of this for yourself. Think about what Mother would have wanted. I looked at her, this sister who had spent the past week treating me like an inconvenience, who had dismissed my opinions and excluded me from decisions, who had assumed I would quietly accept whatever scraps they chose to throw my way. I am thinking about what Mother wanted, I said. She wanted these documents to go to someone who would appreciate their historical significance, not their monetary value. She wanted them to go to someone who would actually listen to her stories, who cared about our family's history. And you think that's you? Michael asked, his tone dripping with condescension. I know that's me, I replied, because I'm the only one who ever asked her about great-grandfather's service. I'm the only one who sat with her while she told stories about the old days. I'm the only one who cared about anything in this family that couldn't be converted to cash. The truth of it hung in the air between us, undeniable and uncomfortable. They had spent years treating me as the least important member of our family, and now they were discovering that our mother had seen something in me that they had missed entirely. This isn't over, Michael said, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. We'll review the documents, make sure everything is legally sound. You do that? I said, lifting the box containing my inheritance. But you'll find that Mother was very thorough. She learned from the best. After all, the barb hit home. Michael's face flushed red, but he said nothing. As I carried my mother's gift down the narrow attic stairs, I felt something I'd never experienced in this house before. I felt powerful. For the first time in my life, I held something my siblings wanted, something they couldn't take from me, something that proved I had been valued and trusted in a way they never were. Behind me, I could hear them beginning to argue, their voices rising as they tried to figure out how to challenge what couldn't be challenged, how to contest what had been given freely and legally. But their anger couldn't touch me now. I had in my hands the proof that I had been seen, that I had been chosen, that I had mattered to the one person whose opinion had always mattered most. The call came 2 weeks later, just as I was settling into my evening routine with a cup of tea and one of the Civil War letters my mother had left me. Patricia's name appeared on my phone screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity, and perhaps a touch of newfound confidence, made me answer. "Sarah, we need to talk." Her voice was different, not the commanding tone she'd used during the estate meetings, but something smaller, more uncertain. About what? About the collection, about ... everything. "Can you meet me at Mother's house tomorrow? There's something I need to show you." The house was scheduled to go on the market the following week. The furniture had been distributed, the valuable items sold or claimed, the personal effects donated or discarded. I couldn't imagine what was left to discuss. "What time?" I asked. 10 o'clock. And Sarah ... "Bring the collection with you, please." The please was what convinced me. Patricia didn't say please often, and never to me. I arrived at the house the next morning to find Patricia's car already in the driveway. She was sitting on the front porch steps, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her usual polished appearance replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. She looked up as I approached, carrying the box containing my mother's gift. "Thank you for coming," she said, standing to unlock the front door. The house felt hollow now, stripped of the furniture and decorations that had made it home. Our footsteps echoed in the empty rooms as Patricia led me to the living room, where she'd set up a card table and 2 folding chairs. "I've been thinking," she said, gesturing for me to sit, "about what happened in the attic, about the collection, about a lot of things." I waited, not sure what she wanted from me. "Michael thinks we should contest Mother's gift to you. He's convinced there's some legal angle we can pursue, some way to prove she wasn't competent when she made those arrangements." "And what do you think?" I asked. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I think I've been an idiot." The admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and raw. "I've been going through Mother's things," she continued, "the personal items we were going to donate. And I found something that made me realize how wrong I've been about everything." She reached into a bag beside her chair and pulled out a small wooden box. I recognized immediately my mother's recipe box, the one she'd kept on the kitchen counter for as long as I could remember. "I thought this was just old recipes," Patricia said, opening the box. "But look at this." Inside, beneath the expected index cards filled with my mother's careful handwriting, was a collection of items I'd never seen before. Letters, report cards, newspaper clippings, small mementos, all carefully preserved and organized. "These are all about you," Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every school achievement, every award, every article you published in the library newsletter." She kept everything. She began pulling out items, laying them on the table between us. My high school graduation announcement, a letter of commendation from the library board, a newspaper clipping about a literacy program I'd helped organize, a photo of me receiving an award for volunteer work at the senior center. "There's more," Patricia said, reaching deeper into the box. "Look at this." She handed me a small notebook, its pages filled with my mother's handwriting. As I read, I realized it was a journal of sorts, documenting conversations we'd had, observations about my life, expressions of pride in my accomplishments. "Sarah helped Mrs. Henderson from next door with her grocery shopping again today. She never expects thanks, just does what needs to be done. Sarah called to check on me after my doctor's appointment. She's the only one who remembers these things without being reminded. Sarah brought me that book I mentioned wanting to read. She listens to everything I say, even the little things." Entry after entry, year after year. My mother had been documenting the ways I showed up, the ways I cared, the ways I contributed to our family that no one else seemed to notice. I never knew she was paying attention to any of this, I said, my voice thick with emotion. None of us did, Patricia replied, but she was. She saw everything, Sarah. She saw how you took care of people, how you remembered the small things, how you showed up even when no one acknowledged it. I looked up at my sister, seeing something in her face I'd never seen before, genuine remorse, real recognition. There's something else, Patricia said, reaching into the box one more time. Something that made me understand why she left you the collection. She handed me a letter addressed to her, dated just a month before our mother's death. Dear Patricia, I know you think I favor Sarah, and perhaps in some ways I do, but not for the reasons you might think. I don't love her more than you or Michael. I love you all equally and completely. But Sarah has something that you and your brother have forgotten how to value. She sees people when you visit. You see the things that need fixing, the problems that need solving, the ways my life could be more efficient or organized. When Michael visits, he sees legal issues and financial concerns and practical matters that need attention. These things matter, and I'm grateful for your care. But when Sarah visits, she sees me. She asks about my day, my thoughts, my memories. She listens to my stories, even though she's heard them before. She notices when I'm tired or sad or worried, and she responds to what I need rather than what she thinks I should need. The Civil War collection isn't just about historical documents, it's about understanding that some things matter beyond their monetary value. Sarah gets that in a way that you and Michael don't. Not because you're bad people, but because you've learned to measure worth differently. I'm not trying to punish you by giving her something valuable. I'm trying to reward her for seeing value in things that can't be appraised or sold. She's the one who will understand what those letters really represent, not artifacts to be preserved, but stories of real people who lived and loved and suffered and hoped. I hope someday you'll understand that the greatest inheritance I could leave any of you isn't money or property, but the ability to see what really matters. Sarah already has that gift. I pray that you and Michael will find it too. With all my love, Mother Patricia's hands were shaking as I finished reading. She was right, she whispered. About all of it. About you, about me, about the way we've been treating you. I set the letter down carefully, not trusting my voice to remain steady. I called Michael last night, Patricia continued. I told him we weren't going to contest the collection. I told him that Mother was right to give it to you, that you're the only one who would truly appreciate what it represents. What did he say? He was angry. He said I was being sentimental and stupid. He said you'd manipulated Mother somehow, convinced her to favor you. Patricia looked at me directly. But I know that's not true. You never asked for anything, never pushed for special treatment. You just ... showed up. You just cared. The recognition in her voice was something I'd been waiting for my entire life without realizing it. Not just acknowledgement of my existence, but understanding of my value, appreciation for the ways I'd been contributing to our family all along. I owe you an apology, Patricia said. Not just for the estate stuff, but for years of not seeing you, not valuing what you brought to our family. I've been so focused on the big gestures, the expensive gifts, the impressive achievements, that I missed all the small ways you've been taking care of everyone. Patricia, no, let me finish. I need to say this. She took a deep breath. You were right to keep the collection. Mother was right to give it to you, and I was wrong to think that love could be measured in dollar amounts or divided equally like property. We sat in silence for a moment, the empty house, holding space for this new understanding between us. What happens now? I asked. Now we try to be a family again, a real family, not just people who happen to share DNA and legal obligations. Patricia reached across the table and touched my hand. I want to know you, Sarah, really know you. I want to understand what Mother saw in you that I was too blind to see. And Michael will come around or he won't. But I'm done letting his anger dictate how this family operates. I'm done pretending that efficiency is more important than connection. I looked around the empty living room, remembering all the family gatherings that had taken place here. All the times I'd sat quietly while others dominated the conversation. All the moments I'd felt invisible in my own family. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like to try." Patricia smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. "Good. Because I have an idea about the collection." "What kind of idea?" "What if we donated it to the local historical society? Not for the tax write-off, but because Mother was right. These stories deserve to be shared. And what if we did it together, as a family project? You could research the provenance, I could handle the logistics, and maybe even Michael could help with the legal aspects." The suggestion surprised me. "You want to give it away?" "I want to honor what it represents. Mother didn't leave you those documents so you could sell them and buy a new car. She left them to you because she trusted you to understand their real value and do the right thing with them." I thought about the letters I'd been reading, the stories of soldiers writing to their families, the human connections that had survived across more than a century. Patricia was right. These weren't meant to be hidden away or sold to the highest bidder. They were meant to be shared, to teach, to connect us to our history and to each other. "I think Mother would like that," I said. "I think she would too." As we packed up the items from the recipe box, I felt something shifting between my sister and me. Something that had been broken for years, finally beginning to heal. It wasn't a complete transformation that would take time and effort from both of us. But it was a beginning. A recognition that family isn't just about shared genetics or legal obligations, but about seeing and valuing each other for who we really are. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by someone in my family. And for the first time, I understood that being seen was worth more than any inheritance, more valuable than any collection, more precious than anything that could be appraised or divided or fought over. Some gifts, I realized, can't be contested in court or calculated on a spreadsheet. Some gifts can only be given freely, received gratefully, and treasured completely. 6 months later, I stood in the main hall of the County Historical Society, watching visitors examine the display case that held my mother's collection. The Civil War letters were beautifully mounted behind glass, each one accompanied by carefully researched context and historical background. A small plaque at the bottom read, "The Henderson Family Collection, donated in memory of Margaret Thompson by her children." "It looks perfect," Patricia said, appearing beside me with 2 cups of coffee from the reception table. Mother would be so proud. The opening reception for the exhibit was better attended than any of us had expected. Local history buffs, students, families with children, all drawn to these intimate glimpses into the past, these personal stories that made history feel real and immediate. Miss Thompson, a young woman, approached us, notebook in hand. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from the county newspaper. Could I ask you a few questions about the collection?" I glanced at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. 6 months ago, she would have stepped forward to handle the interview herself, assuming I wasn't capable of representing the family properly. Now, she waited for me to take the lead. "Of course," I said. "What made your family decide to donate these documents rather than sell them?" I thought about how to answer, how to explain the journey that had brought us here. My mother always said that some things are worth more than their price tag. These letters represent real people, real families, real connections across time. They belong in a place where they can teach and inspire, not locked away in a private collection. And the research you did to provide context for each piece, that must have taken considerable time. It did. But it was important to get the stories right. Each letter represents someone's son, someone's father, someone's beloved. They deserved to have their stories told accurately and with respect. The reporter scribbled notes, then looked up with interest. "I understand this project brought your family together in an unexpected way." I smiled, glancing at Patricia. It reminded us that the most valuable inheritance isn't always money or property. Sometimes it's understanding, connection, the knowledge that someone saw you clearly and loved what they saw. After the reporter moved on, Patricia and I walked through the exhibit together. Reading the placards I'd written, seeing the letters through the eyes of strangers who were discovering them for the first time. Look at this, Patricia said, stopping in front of a letter from a young soldier to his sister. You wrote that this shows how family connections sustained people through the hardest times. That's beautiful, Sarah, it's true, I said. Family isn't just about being related. It's about choosing to see each other, to support each other, to show up even when it's difficult. We paused in front of the final display case, which contained not just Civil War documents, but also some of my mother's personal items, her reading glasses, a photo of our family, the small notebook where she'd recorded her observations about my life. I still can't believe she kept track of all those things, Patricia said, reading one of the journal entries displayed under glass. All those years. She was paying attention to details none of the rest of us noticed. She was good at seeing people, I said. Really seeing them? She learned it from you, I think. I looked at my sister in surprise. What do you mean? I mean, you were the one who taught her that paying attention to small things mattered. You were the one who asked about her day, who remembered her stories, who noticed when she was tired or worried. She learned how to see people by watching how you saw her. The observation hit me like a revelation. I'd always thought of myself as the recipient of my mother's attention, the beneficiary of her careful observation. But Patricia was right. It had been a reciprocal relationship, a mutual exchange of seeing and being seen. Sarah, a familiar voice called from across the room. I turned to see Tyler approaching, now a college sophomore home for spring break. He'd grown even taller, but his smile was the same one that had warmed my heart at that long-ago Thanksgiving dinner. Tyler, I'm so glad you could make it. Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss this. This is so cool, Aunt Sarah. All these people learning about our family history because of your research. Our family history, I corrected. This belongs to all of us. Yeah, but you're the one who made it matter. You're the one who turned a bunch of old letters into something that teaches people about real life, real love, real sacrifice. He gestured around the room. This is amazing. Patricia watched this exchange with a soft smile. Tyler's right, you know? You didn't just preserve these documents, you brought them to life. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, the three of us found ourselves alone in the exhibit hall. The letters glowed softly under the museum lighting, these voices from the past now speaking to a new generation. I have something for you, Patricia said, reaching into her purse. I've been waiting for the right moment. She handed me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a key, old brass, worn smooth with age. It's the key to Mother's house, she explained. Michael and I talked, and we want you to have it. But the house sold months ago. The new owners are history buffs. When they heard about the collection, about what you'd done with the research, they asked if you'd be interested in helping them restore some of the original features. They want to turn it into a Boudin breakfast that celebrates local history. I stared at the key, feeling its weight in my palm. They want me to help. They want you to consult on the historical accuracy, help them tell the story of the families who lived there. It would be paid work, and you'd have access to the house whenever you needed it for research. It's perfect, Tyler added. You get to keep the house in the family, sort of, and help other people understand what makes it special. I closed my fingers around the key, feeling the circle completing itself. The house where I'd grown up feeling invisible would become a place where stories were told and history was honored. The family that had overlooked me for so long was now trusting me with preserving our legacy. There's one more thing, Patricia said. Michael called this morning. He wants to apologize, to be part of this project if you'll let him. He said he's been thinking about what Mother wrote in that letter, about learning to see what really matters. I looked around the exhibit hall one more time, at the letters that had brought my family back together, at the evidence of lives lived with love and purpose and connection. My mother had been right. Some inheritances can't be divided or appraised or contested. Some gifts can only be received with gratitude and shared with generosity. Tell him yes, I said. Tell him we're all learning to see what really matters. As we turned off the lights and locked the museum doors behind us, I felt something I'd never experienced before. I felt like I belonged not just to a family, but to a story larger than myself. A story about the value of paying attention, the importance of being seen, and the way love can be passed down through generations in the most unexpected ways. The key to my childhood home felt warm in my pocket as we walked into the spring evening. 3 generations of a family that had finally learned to see each other clearly, to value what couldn't be appraised, to understand that the greatest inheritance is the knowledge that you matter, that you are seen, that you are loved.